Hey, before you read about it on Facebook or Twitter, or hear about it from your friends, find out what today's big stories really mean with me, Sean Hannity, today at 2, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend by Stephen Calabrese, who was special assistant to Attorney General Ed Meese. He was also a clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia. He argues that per the Constitution's appointments clause, Special Counsel Bob Mueller is exceeding his authority. He cites some case law to make the argument that Mueller should not be the one bringing the indictments he has brought. Rosenstein is not really constitutionally empowered to delegate that authority to Mueller any more than President Trump could delegate his veto power to Mr. Rosenstein, writes Calabrese, suggesting that Mueller's investigation has crossed the legal line and sort of not asking the question, but it's implicit in his op-ed. Where is Rod Rosenstein? Where's the Department of Justice to abide constitutional limits and enforce associated case law on the topic of special counsel? For more on this topic and others related, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend, former United States Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, who is now the Dean of Belmont University School of Law in Nashville, also the author of the book True Faith and Allegiance. Alberto Gonzales, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. And so what about the argument that Calabrese makes that, Mueller is exceeding his authority and Rosenstein isn't abiding his, and this creates a problem. It's not consistent with case law on the topic and the Appointments Clause of the Constitution.
Well, several points. One, I am assuming that, there are a number of very smart lawyers, as smart as the author here, in terms of looking at these kinds of issues and questions, and I suspect that they've looked at it and perhaps have reached a different conclusion. Secondly, in terms of supervision, we don't know what kind of oversight supervision Rod is given, is providing in connection with the investigation. There may be conversations every day, and so that Rod is watching very carefully what Bob Mueller is doing. And then third, in terms of whether or not the investigation should be stopped, we have to remember that there is also the objective of finding out what Russia did and how they did it so that we can hold them accountable. So that for that very reason, in my judgment, the investigation needs to be allowed to conclude so that Bob Mueller can tell us what the heck the Russians did to us.
What about the questions, though, that have been raised and new ones being raised per last week's disclosure to Gowdy and Nunez about this top secret source without revealing the source and so forth? But this back and forth between Justice and House Intel Committee for the better part of the last year to get documents to which that House Intel Committee is entitled, and the questions about the Obama administration, about the FBI's investigation, the contradictory statements from Jim Comey about Mike Flynn and whether he was being truthful or not truthful. All of the internal questions with respect to these law enforcement agencies and senior level officials in the previous administration. Should the investigation include that too prior to its conclusion?
I don't know that it should. Rod Rosenstein can make that call as to whether or not that should also be included, or whether or not there should be the appointment of another special counsel, or whether or not the Congress should exercise its oversight. I understand the frustration that Congress has with the department in receiving information. There is this dance that occurs between every Congress and every DOJ with respect to sensitive information. And oftentimes, as a matter of comedy, the department is willing to provide the information, either directly providing the documents or providing a summary or providing a briefing as to what the documents say. One thing we have to remember is that these documents may be very sensitive in terms of relating to an ongoing investigation. And when you're talking about an ongoing investigation and providing that information, vital that investigation to the Congress, where there's a history of leaking, then I can understand there is concern by the Department of Justice in providing that information. And so I have every confidence that the department is working hard to try to reach some kind of arrangement with the Congress to alleviate, so that Congress can conduct the proper oversight. And at the appropriate time, they will have access to the documentation. But, the number one priority for the department is to make sure that they get this investigation right and get it done as quickly as possible. And the last thing they want to do is turn over documents to the Congress, which may then compromise the investigation. Because as we know, all of this has been politicized by both parties. And I think that there is great concern at the department and turning over sensitive information about an ongoing investigation to a Congress which has shown itself to be incapable of dealing with these kinds of issues in a non-political fashion.
Okay. Well, it's unbelievable that the Mueller investigation is about to enter its second year. And if you were advising President Trump, would you sit down and have a face-to-face meeting with Robert Mueller?
I'm not in a position to answer that question without knowing Donald Trump better in terms of what kind of client he would be, how he would be in that kind of setting. I don't know about what evidence Bob Mueller may have. Obviously, Rudy Giuliani and his team have a better idea of the risk involved in having the president testify. I think there's an expectation by the American people that the president would make himself available. I think that the White House has pledged cooperation. This would be viewed as some level of cooperation, and so I think the president probably at the end of the day should testify. I know there are lawyers who say it'd be crazy for him to testify. I keep hearing in my own mind the words of Representative Gowdy. Listen, if you're innocent, act like it. And so again, I just don't have enough information, quite frankly, about Donald Trump as a possible witness in terms of whether or not I could ultimately recommend that he sit down for it. I think the American people, though, I think there's an expectation of many in the American public that the president should make himself available and answer questions that might hopefully wrap up this investigation sooner as opposed to later.
You know a lot of the players here at Justice and at FBI. Many are careerists. They were there, worked for you. You worked with them during your time as Attorney General and as a counsel to the President of the United States. Is there anything you've seen? I understand you're not privy to everything going on, but with an expert perspective, even though it's an outside one, anything you've seen from the people that you know at Justice or FBI that concerns you, that some of the individuals you know that you're disappointed in how they've behaved or performed?
Well, there are a lot of people that have been mentioned in the press that I really just don't know. Obviously, some of the actions taken in connection with the Clinton investigation to me is puzzling and disappointing. I think I speak for virtually every line FBI agent, employee in disappointment in Mr. Comey. Just this whole book tour thing, I think, has been very disappointing, and I think it's a very, very unfortunate, quite frankly. So, but am I surprised by that? I'm not sure that I can say that I am surprised, given what I know about Jim. He's extremely talented, but like all of us, we sometimes make mistakes. And I think in this particular case, talking about the president the way that he has, and talking about matters that are still subject to investigation, I think is not a good place to be. So, yes, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that the department has been tarnished. There are great men and women that work there, and even though the criticism may be leveled at the top, at Sessions, at Rosenstein, at Comey, et al., if you work at the Department of Justice, you can't help but feel a little bit demoralized, quite frankly. And I think that's very, very unfortunate, because we need our people to be motivated, to be energized, and to be supported, quite frankly.
Well, do you think James Comey could face criminal charges for leaking information? He says it was not classified information that he gave to one of his professors.
Well, I don't know if it was classified. I read somewhere that he said, this is really more like a diary. When when I was the Attorney General, I went to a private meeting involving members of Congress involving a secret surveillance program that President Bush had authorized. The only thing I wrote in those notes to myself was the classified name of the program. That was the only thing that was classified in those notes. And again, these were notes for me to keep, to memorialize that meeting with members of Congress. And I was subject to an investigation because of that. And so the fact that you may feel like, well, this is for a diary, this is my personal note, it doesn't matter. If it includes classified information, you have to be careful about the way you handle it. You have to be careful about the way you disclose it. And so it's potentially possible that there's a possible violation here. Then at the end of the day, even when there is a criminal violation, the department has to make decisions as to whether or not are we going to go prosecute this case. There is such a thing called prosecutorial discretion. And so even though there may be a belief that probably a crime was committed here, a violation of law occurred, the department, for whatever reason, may make the decision, we're not going to move forward on this.
You mentioned you probably think it's a good idea for President Trump to sit down for an interview, interrogation, however you want to describe it, with Mueller in the interest of transparency and the public's right to know. What about this question that's being batted about in the public arena now? We just put it to Rich Lowry. This has been advanced by Andy McCarthy over at National Review, former federal prosecutor, and others, that one thing that the president has within his power and could do in the interest of transparency and putting all the cards on the table for the public to see is to declassify all this related information. Do you think that's something that the president should take under advisement or even go so far as doing?
Listen, if it shouldn't be classified, then it needs to be unclassified. But if it is in the national interest of our country to remain classified, then it should remain classified. And I can't make that calculation. You know, one thing that I think there is a legitimate question. One of the concerns about President Trump testifying, giving oral testimony, is the possibility of a perjury charge. There is, in my judgment, a legitimate question as to whether or not the President of the United States can be criminally prosecuted by the Department of Justice. There's a 1973 and a 2000 OLC opinions that conclude that the President cannot be. And if that's the case, if that is in fact the case, then the President would not face any legal liability for making a statement and providing oral testimony. Now, of course, that will be challenged if he were to testify and to make a misstatement, and Bob Mueller then tries to indict him. I'm sure that the White House would challenge that, and they would fight these two OLC opinions to the court to say, wait a minute, the own Department of Justice believes the president is immune from prosecution. So there are a lot of very complicated, difficult twists and turns here that we may have to go through before we see the final resolution of all of this.
He is Alberto Gonzales, former United States Attorney General and counselor to the president, now the dean of Belmont University School of Law in Nashville. Also, his latest book, True Faith and Allegiance, you want to check out. Attorney General Gonzales, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.